Welcome to episode 23 of the What Happens Next podcast, the podcast dedicated to you if you're in your 50s and 60s and you're thinking about the next chapter of your lives. Because my experience as a childhood financial planner, my name's Chris Dames, by the way, is that actually that period of our lives, whilst money is fundamentally important and will be the subject of the interview we do today, it's also important to have a more nuanced view of what a life well lived looks like in this chapter. And in this episode, I am interviewing the brilliant Chris Budd about financial worry and financial well-being. And in this interview, we talk about financial well-being and its relationship between money and happiness, why worrying about money is a significant cause of stress, which impacts our physical health, the key to understanding where we get joy from, and actually why a lot of joy comes from internal feelings as opposed to external elements. Kindness, as some of you might know, I wrote a book on kindness a couple of years ago when I was trying to become a kinder person. But the benefits of being kind and giving joy in your own life, looking at how we measure success externally often, when in actual fact the success, as we've said, comes from within. Autonomy and independence and the part it plays in living a happy life, and what you can do, the practical steps you can take to live a life full of more well-being today. So without further ado, let's go on to the interview with Chris that I'm sure you're going to get loads out of. Chris, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate your time this morning.
Always enjoyed talking to you, Chris.
Thank you, mate. I really appreciate it. So for those of us in our audience who don't know you, tell us a bit about you.
Imagine. So I been in financial advice all my life. Ran a financial planning company in Bristol called Ovation Finance. And in 2018, I sold a majority of it to something called an employee ownership trust. In 2015, I had a summer off because I was a bit stressed, and I decided to write a book, as so many of us do. But I didn't want to just write a book about what Chris Budd knows. I wanted to write a book about how to create a financial plan. But I needed an angle. I wanted something more than just create a financial plan. So very quick story. My wife worked at the time she's a cancer nurse, and she was working at a place called the Penny Bron Cancer Centre, BROHN, Penny Bron Cancer Centre in near Bristol. And she was telling me about how we have immune cells, and our immune cells in our bodies fight our cancer cells. And when somebody has a diagnosis like cancer, they get zapped with chemo and radiotherapy to kill the cancer cells. But we also have immune cells in our body that can help too. And so that's what they do at the Penny Bron Cancer Centre. It's fantastic science behind what's called lifestyle prescribing, is one phrase for it, where we can help ourselves. So I was just knocked out by this idea. And I said to her, well, hang on a minute. One of the biggest causes of stress, so stress is really bad for your immune cells. One of the biggest causes of stress is worried about money. So I said, why don't I write a book called How Financial Planning Can Help Prevent Cancer? And she looked at me and went, I don't think that's a very good idea.
You've drawn a straight line where there should be a bit of a bit of a nuance.
A bit more subtle than that. So they use the phrase well-being a lot in Penny Bron, living well with cancer. So I thought, well, why don't I put these two words together, financial and well-being? So I did actually invent the phrase financial well-being. I Googled it to make sure nobody else had come up with the term, and there were two entries on that Google search. One of them was a book that I know you know, because your 5 areas on the previous slide are based on it, by Rath and Harter, Gallup's survey of what makes us happy. And that's just so I published a book, and now if you Google the term, there's something like 330 million returns on that Google search. So it's absolutely taken off, which is great because it needs to. But we'll get into that, won't we?
Yeah. So what I'm interested in is the insight your wife gave you when you were thinking about well-being overall. So so when we look at that sort of well-being framework, what have you learned from your wife's work? And we'll talk about financial well-being in a minute. But what have you learned from your wife's work about how to live well?
Well, it's a subject that we don't like to look at. What happens if you get a life-ending diagnosis? For very obvious reasons. But actually, what we learn, one of the things that knocked me out. So as you know, because we have a podcast, financial wellbeing podcast, and I interviewed Dr. Catherine Zolman quite a few years ago now on the podcast, and there was something. She's a lead medical practitioner at Penny Brown, and there was something that she said that knocked me out, which was that a lot of people who have a life-ending diagnosis after a period of adjustment and acceptance actually report an increase in their well-being. And we talked about, well, why does that happen? And it's because we get rid of the crap.
Yeah.
We stop striving, we stop accumulating, and we just concentrate on things that matter and things that bring us joy. So why don't we do that a lot earlier in life?
Oh, but I suppose that the element of there, not to be too morbid on this early in the morning, is that finite nature of time, right? If you,
but we all got a finite amount of time, Chris.
True, absolutely, but we just don't realise it.
We just know when that end point is.
Yeah.
But no one lives forever. So I think there is something to be learned from that about how we can change lives now to be happier.
Yeah, I agree. The sort of memento mori philosophy of saying sort of know that this is finite and focus on what's important, I think is super important. And I think, I mean, what's interesting, and we're getting this with a lot of our guests who are providing their own expert insight, but have been through a transition of what happens next in their own lives. How did you do it? And what did you do well? And what, if you had your time again, would you do differently?
So I, before I sold Ovation, 7 years before, I realized that owning a business, everybody thinks that owning a business is great because you've got freedom, you can do what you like. Actually, it's completely the opposite. You feel trapped because you can't just resign and get another job. So I had a moment where I don't care about sharing with you. I was depressed. I had some mental health issues. I went to see my GP, and the GP didn't know what to do because she didn't really have any pills to give me or couldn't put a plaster on it. So she gave me a questionnaire. And I came home and I sat at the kitchen table and looked at this questionnaire, which is a tatty folded piece of paper. And it was headed Depression Questionnaire. And the first question was, how many times a week do you feel like killing yourself? She'd given me that questionnaire and said, fill that in and come back in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
What would have happened if I hadn't come back? I don't know.
I mean, this is probably another debate, but I don't know whether the way that we treat mental health is, and it's moved on, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, not sufficiently by a long way.
Yeah.
If anybody fancies Googling the phrase hollow heart, there's a charity that I'm involved with called the Hollow Heart, where I actually ran into the house to try and find my badge. I couldn't find it. But you wear a badge, which is a hollow heart, and it simply means I'm open to a conversation about mental health. If anybody fancies Googling that and buying a hollow heart and wearing the badge, I would love that. Anyway, so I realized then that I needed to make some changes in my life. And one of the changes I made was to start writing novels, which is something I'd done younger, but got out of the habit of. And secondly, to get myself out of my business. So I worked for 7 years to make myself the least important person in my business. Now, one thing happens at the end of that process, because I now help other owners to do similar things. And one of the things that happens is you realize that who you are is defined by what you do. And who I was defined by being the owner and managing director of Ovation. When the time came that I was no longer that person, who was I?
Yeah.
And I needed to work that out. And so I did. There's an expression that I use a lot, which is it's a lot easier to be pulled than pushed. So if you want to leave something, such as retire or sell a business or whatever, the change, what happens next that you talk about, it's a lot easier if there's something pulling you away from it than if there's people behind you with their feet in your back trying to push you out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I then wrote the book and I found the title and I found the concept and I started researching the relationship between money and happiness, that then became my new
Your
fascination.
pull.
My pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I suppose the other element for me is that element of being in a position where you needed something else that wasn't particularly about the money, but it was about what was it that drove you on to carry on, and why didn't you just take some time off? What was the motivation to get back into it after quite a relatively short break?
What does time off mean? Sitting at home staring at the wall? What am I going to do?
Yeah,
I want to do stuff that interests me and that gives me purpose. Because the one of the two main sources of well-being in life is having a life with meaning and purpose in it. And by that time, I also set up a youth cricket section at my local village cricket club, which remains one of the things I'm most proud of in my life. It was just me, my two kids, and some of their friends. After a few years, I got help from a guy called David Lloyd. Some will know as the host of our podcast. And then eventually the rest of the club kind of started getting behind it. Now there's 180 kids every Friday night in the summer playing cricket down there, and I'm no longer involved. And I'm just so that's the kind of stuff that matters to you. So have a break from what? I don't want to have a break.
I agree. I agree.
Because I still have to do something,
Purpose and values sit in the middle, right? It's about turning around and adding value to the world.
Yeah, here's a great example. I currently am in the middle of building up a little hobby business of buying and selling vinyl records, right? And my son jokes at me because he compares me to Hank in Breaking Bad. Now, if anybody's seen Breaking Bad, there's one of the series where Hank can't work because I can't remember what happens. He gets shot or something happens. Anyway, he can't work. He's in a period of convalescence for months. And he starts collecting stones and gems, but not rare gems, crystals. And every day he gets boxes of these things delivered and he's sitting there manically cataloguing them. And it's just, he's just distracting himself,
So are your vinyls in alphabetical order or do you do something different?
Well, you'll see behind quite a lot of CDs, and they are all in alphabetical order. And sometimes people say, "Oh, look at you, sad." I've got 2,500 records. How do you think I'm going to find anything if they're not in alphabetical order?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've. Oh, Chris is gone. I don't know where he's gone.
Go on, carry on. I'll introduce you to someone in a minute. I've got a little dog that likes to come in and out of my cabin and leave the door open.
Fab. So, talk to us. I mean, I was going to say there's this new thing called Spotify knocking around that but we're going to go down a rabbit hole if we go down there. So let's get back onto the subject, and let's focus on financial well-being. What is financial well-being?
In a nutshell, the relationship between money and happiness. And I will then double click on that and go further in. What it isn't is how to manage your money. How to manage your money is part of it, but it's way deeper than that. The reason I say that is because I mentioned those two entries on a Google search at the beginning of this whole journey. And one of them was Wellbeing in the Workplace, a report by Barclays, which they termed financial wellbeing. So if you look at financial wellbeing in the workplace, a lot of people who run financial wellbeing programs and financial education focus on being better with money. Now, actually, my view is A, that's way too narrow. And B, there's a better place to start.
Yeah. So where do you start? If financial well-being is a bit of a new concept to you, and you're listening to this, and you're not involved in our world, and you're thinking about what's next in your life, where do you start?
Start with trying to understand what are the sources of joy. So let me put it this way, right? There's a framing in the Four Cornerstones book that I use, which is there are 3 simple steps to achieving financial well-being, i.e., good financial outcomes, i.e. ones that make you happy, right? There are 3 simple steps. What you do is you start off with step 2, because step 2 is what makes us happy? What are the sources of joy? And the answer to that is it's internal, not external. Yeah. So let me explain what I mean by that. If your well-being comes from external sources, what we might call extrinsic motivation or external self-worth, your self-worth is coming from the approval of others in some way. It could be by meeting a target or a deadline, but it could also be status and wealth and fame. And your well-being is therefore on the other side of somebody else's approval.
Mm.
If you, and I'm not knocking this, by the way, because it is still the source of joy, but it's relentless. You've got to keep chasing it because it's always the other side. So if you are somebody that likes to drive a nice car, nothing wrong with that. But if you're driving a nice car because you want people to see that you're driving a nice car, and you're driving down the road and somebody looks at you and goes, "Oh, a nice car," that's great. But once that's done, you need to find another person to go, "Oh, nice car." It's relentless. So this is not a good source of well-being. The best sources of well-being are internal, living a life with meaning and purpose. My cricket story, that will live with me forever. I don't need anybody to tell me. I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a much more internal source. So that's step 2. Step 3 is then, well, okay, if it's internal, where do you get that from? And the simple answer there is kindness, something you know all about. Helping other people. That's where meaning and purpose comes from.
Yeah.
There are other ways. So writing something that's really cool doesn't always need somebody else to see it, you know?
Yeah.
But you'll know that it's something really cool that you've written. It could just be that you like to make pottery or whatever it could be, something for you.
Yeah.
And being kind and caring of other people is something for you. So now we've got.
I've talked about this quite a long time, spoke about it quite a lot. People assume that kindness is a completely unselfless act. Actually, if you help others, you win as well, right? And that's why I'm a massive advocate of people being kinder, because actually you win. You win.
So there's a book just there, which is called The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And obviously I want people to buy
What a combination. It's almost as good as me and you.
That's where people should start with that book, frankly, above mine.
That's a great recommendation. I haven't read that.
Oh, it's amazing. They spent a week talking about what is joy. And they also they filmed it for a documentary, but the book is much, much better. And there's a line in that Archbishop Desmond Tutu says, where he says, "Joy is your reward for the giving of joy."
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. It's all there. So listen, let me just finish my little construct. So now we've got step 2. It's internal, not external. Step 3. Well, where does internal come from? The giving of joy. Now we go back to step 1, which is creating your financial plan. But you can only start that financial plan when you understand the principles of joy, which is why you've got to start with step 2. Or really, step 2 should be step 1, if you see what I mean. But we all tend to start with step 1.
Yeah.
Teaching about money, educating about money, creating a financial plan, and then ending up and going, right, well, what's all this money for?
What makes us happy, right? What do we what do we want to do with the money to bring joy to our lives? So if you, as you say, if you haven't answered the joy question, it's quite difficult to answer the step 1. So that makes perfect sense to me. In terms of, because there's the stuff we know about that, but there's also the societal pressures. What are the tips and techniques you'd give somebody to ignore those societal pressures and live a life with meaning, purpose, and with a bit more joy in their lives?
There's I call these money distractions. Images of success. Excuse me just a second. I am still here, but I'll just introduce you to things that give me joy. So come and meet Luna.
Oh, hello, Luna. We've never had a dog on What Happens Next before.
Listen, one of the things I love about lockdown is that standards of professionalism have plummeted.
Well, I always, it's funny, I always tell this story in lockdown. So I was the worst homeschooling dad in the world in lockdown. It didn't go well, Chris, because Charlotte was okay because she was sick. She was okay. Her GCSEs got cancelled, and that was a bit of a challenge. But the younger one got sent a bunch of work from school every day, and we were then tasked with sitting down and doing it. So I used to sit down, get her ready, and then sort of carry on with what I need to do work-wise. I remember being in a Zoom meeting once, looking round, realising that Sophie had just gone out in the garden and he'd like sort of ignored the work. I went, okay, cool, sort of a bit more flexible, and it's like, it's all good, whatever you need to do. But then there was, halfway through this Zoom meeting, there was a shadow behind me. And it was Sophie. And she just went, Dad, have a look at this. And it was a massive clump of mud. I've never had to deal with that in a meeting before. And I was like, you know what, Sophie, that's really lovely. Thank you for sharing. Do you mind if I carry on? And it's like, what do you do? But I agree with you. Lockdown was a humanising period of time because we were all in the same boat. We're on a mission with What Happens Next to help as many people as we can navigate the next chapter of their life. So I need a favour. I'd like you to visit our YouTube channel at What Happens Next Live, and we'll make sure we put a link to the YouTube channel in the comments. Enjoy the videos, like the ones that you get benefit from, but most importantly, please subscribe. We want to help as many people as we can with What Happens Next, and subscribing to our YouTube channel for free is the easiest way you can help us. Actually, a lot of those status games didn't matter anymore, did they? And it's interesting how sort of dynamics changed.
Yeah.
What do you think the last 4 years have taught us about lockdown? The lockdown, COVID. What do you reckon it's taught us about financial well-being?
Well, I don't think it's any coincidence that financial well-being as a topic has absolutely exploded at the same time. I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
Yeah, interesting.
Because we've had to reevaluate lives, a bit like that cancer diagnosis. You reevaluate lives, and work out, well, what actually matters to me, what's 100%. Important to me. And when we do that, it will be the quality of our relationships and not the amount of stuff. Yeah. Especially if there's nobody out in the streets who can see you in your expensive car. Yeah. By the way, I absolutely have to explain, I've got no problem with expensive cars, because if somebody wants to drive an expensive car because they love the car, that's cool. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, that is. So let me give you a little example of what that is, financial well-being. Let me give you another little crude example, just as a slight sidestep. Imagine you've got somebody who comes to you and says that they want a cash flow forecast, a financial plan to buy a yacht, right? That cliche of wealth. A financial advisor will manage the pensions. A financial planner will create the plan for the future. A financial well-being oriented planner will ask the question, what's the yacht for? Now, if the person answers, well, because I want to get a less expensive yacht to show that I'm a wealthy person, I want to take it down to the expensive marina down on the south coast and stand on the back with a martini at 6 o'clock and wave to the other wealthy people. The research suggests that those values are in conflict with values of well-being. So that will probably make them less happy.
If on the other hand, a bigger yacht as well, isn't there?
Yeah. On the other hand, if that person replies, well, I want to take it down to my boat club at the local reservoir because I've always been sailing, it's my hobby. That's when my friends are. And when my grown-up kids come home at the weekend, they love coming out with us on the yacht. That's much more internal. And that will make them more happy.
You know what? When you were telling that story, my mind went to the fact that actually, when I think about what I spend money on and when we talk to our clients about spending money, the most valuable bits are the memories we create with the people we love. So it goes back to that personal relationships again, doesn't it? It's all about that.
And so financial well-being is about creating plans and using money to get that stuff. But I haven't answered your money distractions question, Chris, because I've got one really good tip. Actually, it's a slightly silly tip, but I thought that might be fun. There are lots of money distractions telling us that you look at measures of success, right? If you look at the media, if you look at the telly, if you look at Kardashians, measures of success are wealth and fame. According to what we are given. And the reason for that is because they're given to us by advertising that wants us to buy their stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do is I avoid advertising. I will go to great lengths to avoid advertising. For 30, 40 years, whenever I watch telly, I've got the remote next to me. Watching cricket, especially the T20, is a nightmare because I've got to grab the remote every 4 minutes to turn off the adverts. But I do it I do it. But the most extreme example of this is I go to the cinema with my son because we both love the movies. And I will go and sit in the foyer while he goes in, and I will sit in the foyer reading the book until the trailers and adverts are finished.
And then when the
he cuts
movie
me,
starts,
and I go running in as the opening credits come up.
right, here's a question, because I'm conscious that we could chat forever. So we will get to the questions that are really going to add value to our audience. But I'm
Well,
curious.
you're saying that one won't? God.
I love that tip. I love that tip, by the way. This one won't add value, but I'm curious about it, so I'm going to ask it anyway. What movie best encapsulates financial well-being?
Oh, there's lots of them, aren't there? But you could look at something like The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh, right. I mean,
what's important in life is your relationships and helping people, not how much money you accumulate. I mean, it's all there in Dickens, isn't it?
No, I love it. Absolutely love it. And there's a reason why that. And I like the way you picked the Muppets one, because there are other adaptations are available. Now, what we've done with What Happens Next is, again, as you say, used existing frameworks, changed it a bit, just to make sure it's easier to communicate that importance of overall well-being when we're thinking about having that conversation. And I know you've done that with financial well-being. So let's talk about that framework a bit. So I know that the way that you see financial well-being, it starts with the four cornerstones. Tell me a little bit about what those four cornerstones are.
So this was the second book that I wrote, because after 8 years after I wrote the first financial well-being book, I realized that I'd learned so much more about the relationship between money and happiness. But I wanted to try and find a way to bring it all together, to break it down and put it into clumps. So number one, what will bring anybody well-being? Anybody who gets a hug from a loved one will feel better. Anybody who does something that's meaningful or purposeful will feel intrinsic joy. Secondly, what makes you happy and gives you well-being? Meaning and purpose for me was setting up the cricket club. It will be different, youth section. Cricket, it will be different for you. It could be pottery. It could be, helping a charity, all sorts of things. Thirdly, we have the barriers that are true of everyone. So we all have behaviors that are that are common to us all. We have them in bigger lumps in some than others, but we all have, for example, confirmation bias, where we seek information to confirm our existing views. And then finally, there are the barriers that are unique to each of us. So some people that we might call these self-limiting beliefs, a belief that actually ends up making a bad financial decision.
In the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's the bad ones, though, because some stories we tell ourselves, like fire hurts, that's a good story, So it's the ones that lead to poor financial decisions would be called self-limiting beliefs. So those are the four areas, true of us all and true of us ourselves, in terms of what will bring us joy and what will prevent joy.
Right. And how do we identify those life-limited stories?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Chris. In my opinion, with help.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and I say that because it's a slightly arguable point, but I think it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to challenge your own beliefs.
Yeah.
It's really, really important to understand that your beliefs are not truths. Just because I believe something to be true doesn't necessarily mean that it is. But challenging myself and working out which one of those aren't actually real and which one of those are leading to poor decisions is not easy to find, because they're my beliefs and therefore I can't see them. So I think you need help. In my view, and I'm going to go out on a limb and be slightly controversial. In my view, every financial advisor should have training in coaching skills. And by coaching skills, I mean listening and questioning skills, in order to help people to understand themselves better. There's no requirement for that whatsoever as being as being authorized at the moment. And I think there should be myself. So it could be a counselor if it's a bit more serious and deep-seated than that. But certainly when you go to your financial advisor, just say, I'd like to talk about my future and I'd like you to just challenge me a bit.
Yeah, I think there's my impression is that there's a bit of a change in expectation of financial advisors now, and part of the reason is because we're having a bit more open and nuanced conversations about what money means to people, and I'm hoping that continues. So that's good. So they're the four pillars, they're the four cornerstones, and I know that there's 5 principles that go along with them. Tell me a little bit about them.
So on that universal truths bit, the bit that's true of us all, there are 5 areas. And I just want to make a little point here, Chris. I touched on this earlier on. This isn't new. I'm not saying anything that I've made up. I'm not being clever here. I've just got lots of books I've read. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
Buddhism taught this stuff 2,500 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
And other religions, teach lots about, of course they do, about what makes happiness. And I think it's.
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Like, if you and again, I am in the past 10 years, I've really got into philosophy, and you take from it what you need to, but not only did the Stoics talk about it and the Buddhists talk about it and these principles, it's all often been repeated. We know that social comparison is the thief of joy because Roosevelt talked about it, and we know that these concepts get repeated, but we're also told, as you say, through advertising for people who want to sell us stuff, that actually things make us happy, and we know they don't.
There's an expression that I love where you might get stopped. So you might stop and ask somebody for directions. Let's get lost in the countryside. You stop and ask for directions, and the answer comes back, well, I wouldn't start from here. Yeah. And that's kind of how I feel about our relationship with money. We're starting at the wrong place. So, yeah, there's philosophy, there's neuroscience, there's the behavioral finance people. There's loads of stuff, all telling us something that, frankly, Buddha sat in a grove of trees 2,500 years ago and worked it all out. It's all there. So we're having to kind of unlearn how we go about our lives and relearn back to basic principles. So I'm just making that point that this is not Chris Budd makes up stuff. This is just getting out the research that's out there. It's all backed up by research. So the 5 pillars are having a clear path to identifiable objectives, which is a financial plan, really. Having clarity over where the future are, what your future looks like. Those a clear path to identifiable objectives. The identifiable objectives then comes back to the internal self-worth stuff. So identifying what that means for you is the really, really tricky and important part to go through. Then we have ability to cope with financial shocks and control of daily finances. Now, that is the financial resilience stuff. That is financial education stuff. So that's cool. It is in there. It's just not the whole thing. Then we have having financial options, which I'll come back to. And we have clarity and security for those that we leave behind, which comes to the Penny Bronze stuff, and getting your life in order will give you well-being. Now, financial options. Can I talk for 2 minutes about that?
Of course.
So there was a survey done about 2010, I think it was, by a guy called Richard Kahneman, very well-known American professor of philosophy, and they used some data to suggest that more money doesn't make you more happy. To which I, for one, go, duh. After a certain limit, but what they discovered, which was really interesting, was that the limit was really quite low. It was about £80,000 salary a year. Now, that's a nice salary. Anybody would be very happy with that salary. Don't get me wrong, but it's not $1 billion.
Yeah.
You don't need more than, how much would 80,000 a year need in capital, Chris?
Well, it depends on what rate you use. Yeah, something like that.
5 million. So if somebody's got 5 million, any more money won't make them any more happy above 5 million.
Yeah.
Now, 10 years later, somebody else did some research on very similar, if not the same data, which said actually more money does make you more happy.
But marginally, right? Marginally happy.
No. According to their research, some people more money just kept making them more happy. So the two of them, you'd think, if this is on Twitter and two people came up with opposite opinions, they'd all argue and shout at each other, right? But what these two professors did, because they're smart people, is they got together and they collaborated to say, why is our research different? And what they discovered was that the answer is a bit more nuanced. And it was, if you are somebody who is inherently unhappy, more money won't make any difference to you. But other people, more money did make them more happy. Now, I would like to go one step further than that, because this is about having financial options. Does more money give you more financial options? To a point, yes, of course it does. If you have nothing and somebody gives you something, it's silly to say no money will make you Sorry, no more money will make you more happy. But I think the answer is basically it's about your attitude to money. If you are somebody that needs your self worth from external sources, some more money enables you to get that hit of happiness. But
Yeah.
if you are somebody who gets their well-being from internal sources, from meaning and purpose, from the giving of joy, money doesn't make any difference. And that, for me, is the secret to this whole thing.
But this is the interesting thing, because and you've touched on it at the start of our interview when you talked about being head of the business but feeling trapped by the business. And we know that the research says that autonomy is an important factor, isn't it? Having control of what your options are is fundamentally important, both in our work but also in our lives, in terms of how happy we are. So how linked do you think is that feeling of autonomy in terms of the financial options you've got? Because if you've got the money, you've then potentially got the option to say, you know what, I'm going to say no to that work or no to that job, or I'm only going to do stuff I love, or I'm only going to work with clients I like. I think autonomy is an interesting part of the puzzle, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. But the autonomy doesn't necessarily come with more money.
Yeah,
The
true.
autonomy comes with
But it does come with a threshold, doesn't it? You know,
well, no, it doesn't need any money. Buddhist monks have nothing at all, and they're happy, happiest people on the planet.
yeah.
So it's about, not that I'm about to be a Buddhist monk because I like buying records.
You have to get rid of your record collection, Chris. We can't have that.
There are limits, Chris. There are limits. But so it's about your attitude. And let's just talk about those records for a second. So I still buy physical product when it comes to music for two reasons. One, because I don't trust that one day someone's going to turn it off, and you can't get Joni Mitchell or Neil Young on Spotify anymore because they took their music off in protest. And so people can't listen to their music. I can because I own the physical copy, right?
Yeah.
But I did actually ask myself, I have spent a lot of time looking at my spending and what makes me happy. And buying records doesn't cause me a financial problem. I can afford it. So therefore, I'll allow myself that external way of buying some short-term hits of happiness because it's not causing me a problem. Where, and this comes right back to financial education and financial wellness plans in the workplace, etc. If you teach people the sources of joy and the relationship with money first, they will solve their own problems. Or they might. There's more chance. So I don't really buy much, but I do buy a lot of records. If I actually worked this out, if you clicked on the first song that I own, and you kept going, that would be probably AC/DC song, wouldn't it? I'm trying to think what the first A would be. I don't know anything by a band called Aardvark, so probably AC/DC. And you kept going to probably ZZ Top, right? And you played every single song I own in all my different formats, 24 hours a day without stop. It would carry on for 137 years.
Amazing. Well, you know what you're doing when you're thinking about what happens next. And I'm a bit disappointed that you don't own a record from the Swedish folk pop band Aardvark. No, I'm only kidding. I don't know Aardvark at all. Right. The question I want to ask you, it's really interesting. How do we work out if we're, as you say, self-empowering people with the knowledge of financial well-being? How do we work out what in our lives we should spend our money on that makes us happy? Because one of your phrases that I love is the simplest concept of financial well-being is working out what makes us happy and spend money on that. How do we truly identify that?
Understand the general principles, what's true of us all. That and there's lots of research out there, but the simple answer is it's living a life with meaning and purpose and the quality of our social relationships.
Yeah.
They are the things that add most to our well-being. And then how are you spending your money? And as you said in your talk at the beginning, your time on that.
Yeah.
Joy is your reward for the giving of joy. So one thing that I don't think gets talked about enough is philanthropy. in financial advice meetings. And by philanthropy, I don't necessarily mean giving hundreds of millions away like Bill Gates. It could just be a tenner a month to the Red Cross, or it could be your own time helping at a local charity. It could be that person just selling their business. What next? Become a trustee of a charity and get involved with that. There's lots of things that we can do to help others that don't tend to get put into financial plans. And I think every financial plan should have a section that says, where is your giving?
Yeah, no, where is your giving? I think is a fundamental one. Talk to me about estates. So we've talked about the positive things that people can do to think about their own financial well-being. What are the mistakes that people typically make when they start along this journey of thinking about their relationship between money and happiness?
I think mistakes. I'm wary of that word because it sounds like we're being.
It's a bit draconian.
No. There's a fault, a blame element to it. Very often our poor relationship with money is not our own fault. Doesn't mean to say we can't take ownership of it and change it, but there are lots of influences. Whether it's our parents, money doesn't grow on trees. These phrases that get used. There's lots of reasons why we are where we are. One of those reasons is, and I won't go into this into detail now, but it's around how when we feel sad. What do we do to stop feeling sad? We buy stuff. It's even got a name, retail therapy. Retail therapy was a phrase first used by the Chicago Tribune in the 80s, critically describing the purchasing frenzy at Christmas, saying we're buying our well-being by retail therapy. So it's not a good thing, retail therapy, but we use it to justify spending, unnecessary spending.
Well, and it's really interesting, and this is one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a lot. It does solve a problem short term because we do get a dopamine hit from shopping, don't we? But again, it's what you said about having to repeat that consistently to get the same hit.
Yeah. So I would call this, we're all financial well-being junkies, getting short-term hits of well-being by buying stuff we don't need. Because if you did need it, it wouldn't give you the hit. You don't get a hit of dopamine when you go and buy an apple, do you? You know what I mean? Now, again, it's important to stress, is it causing a problem? My short-term hits of happiness that I get from buying records, it's fine. It's not causing me a financial problem. But if somebody is in debt and their spending is getting them more in debt, then that retail therapy is a very bad thing. And that being a financial well-being junkie is a very bad thing. So that's just one example.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And tell me about the work that you do in this space and where people can understand more, find out sort of about the amazing work you do, check out the podcast and think about what they should do next when they're thinking about financial well-being.
So if there's financial advisors watching this, I'd urge you to come and join the Institute of Financial Wellbeing. So I set up the Institute in 2019 to help financial advisors understand this stuff. We also run a training course called the Financial Wellbeing Certificate. So you can learn the principles and how to apply them. And obviously there's some books that you might want to have a look at. So for financial advisors, the IFW is the thing. Where I want to get to, Chris, financial advice is in transition. We're a new profession. We've only been around for 30, 40 years. And when you compare that to like accountancy and the legal profession, it's a very, very new profession. And financial well-being is the direction of travel. If you have a financial advisor and they just talk to you about your money, that's fine. Good financial advisor. But if you then go to a financial planner who then also creates a plan for your future, okay, you're not going back. If you go to a financial well-being, somebody who's learned about financial well-being, and their plan for the future that they create for you is one that will make you happier, not just wealthier, you ain't going back. So where I would love to get to is if the public go to a financial advisor to appoint a new financial advisor and say, do you do financial well-being? Are you a member of the Institute of Financial Wellbeing?
This is the interesting thing, isn't it? This is the interesting thing because what's the insightful question though, right? Because I think, do you do financial well-being? The potential answer, if you go and speak to a financial advisor, might be, yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, it always will be. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll sling that in the bag. But what's the insightful question consumers need to ask if they want to get help, but they want to make sure it's right?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Chris. Well, I guess there's two of them. One is, have you had any training and coaching skills? Have you got any qualifications or have you been on any courses? And secondly, what do you understand by financial well-being? Because I know some people have said to me, financial well-being is just what you get when we give you a financial plan. No.
Yeah.
No, it's a study of the relationship between money and happiness. Somebody else might answer, oh, it's being good with managing your money. No, that's just part of it. It is in there, but that's just part of it. So financial well-being is a study of the relationship between money and happiness, and applying it is helping clients to be happier, not just wealthier.
Love that. Can we give you a shout out to the IFW website, the podcast? Where can people find it?
Yeah, so the Financial Wellbeing Podcast from your usual podcast provider, 100 and something episodes now. There's a lot to go through.
Is it available on vinyl? Because I'd be really disappointed if not.
That's an idea. That is an idea.
You want to immortalise it in hard copy. That's right. I mean, the problem is we're 302 episodes into the Kindness Project, so I don't think we're going to be able to do that anytime soon.
That's a lot of records.
Yeah.
And the thing is, yours will be double albums, Chris, as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I know, just, they can find it on Spotify and iTunes. And...
just Google Institute for Financial Wellbeing. It's easy to find this stuff these days, isn't it? But we have a big conference in May for financial advisors, so we'd love to meet people there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your insight today. I've loved it, and I know everybody in our audience will too. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And I know you're going to get amazing amounts of insight for it. And we'll see you next time on What Happens Next. I really hope you enjoyed that. And one of the things that we really want you to do is get as much from the What Happens Next project as you can. And we think that one of the big things you're going to get loads from, once it's written, is the What Happens Next book. Now, that's currently a work in progress. So I'm doing the work to complete the book now. It will be ready in 2025. But what you can do today is join the waiting list. So you're one of the first people to get a copy and get loads of goodies on top. Because if you join the waiting list today, not only will you get access to the book first, you'll also get loads of goodies that we're currently working on in addition to the book, now ready for launch. To join the waiting list, simply visit whathappensnext.life/book and you'll be the first to know when the book comes out.